so much for coming to hear me speak. It's funny, as a visual artist, I feel like part of the point of making things is that you don't have to speak verbally about them. So it's a fun challenge, and yes, thank you all for coming and listening to me share. I am going to share a little bit about my experience and past and how that kind of, I think, forms ethos. And a lot of ethos, I think, happens subconsciously through your place in time and space and just your experiences and environment. But I think part of it is conscious and in a way aspirational. Like, what's the highest ideal? And in my case, like through the work, well, what's the aspirations and ideals that I have that I'm intending for my work? But I feel like work, creative work, we're all doing work. So whatever that might mean for you. And so yeah, I'll just share a little bit about how certain things might have influenced the sensibility in my work.
Can you speak up a little?
Yeah, I'm mic'd. Should I be?
Sorry, that only goes to the video camera, not.
Oh, okay. But I can speak louder. Okay, sorry. Misunderstood. But I'm from West Palm Beach. I'm totally a product of like living here, being raised here. I went to Armory for art classes when I was a kid, and when the Kravis Center was new, like new, would go to the ballet and things, and visited the Norton when it was Little Norton. And I still have paintings that I go in, like Cezanne's and O'Keeffe's, that when I go in now as a almost 38-year-old, I feel like I'm visiting familiar friends. Oh, I'll put up my little, oh, no, that's me. Okay, this is my current work. But yeah, so it's so nice to have that connection to space in that way. But I grew up an artsy kid, like I'll totally claim that, was really into making and craft of all types. I equally loved visiting the museum and seeing like the high, like the canon, like the greats, and in painting and sculpture. And I would try to reproduce, like O'Keeffe was one of my favorites and still is. And I would try to reproduce her work in like color pencil and watercolor, and like when I was in elementary school. So, whatever, that's what I did in my free time. But I also loved crafty, like glitter and yarn and like sand art and just all the things, right? So there's the art side, and I realized looking back, it's funny what you learn like in retrospect, right? But as from a very early age, I started to have these like hierarchies of making. So there's like the art stuff, and then there's the for fun stuff, and I enjoyed both, but they're separate. And I also grew up very aware that my grandmothers and great grandmothers were very skilled and creative in their own right through, really excellent level of workmanship in knitting and crochet and quilting and even woodworking and painting. Like my grandmother at 65 was a better woodworker than I am now. But like I think maybe one of them graduated high school. Two of them, none of them went to college. They were all self-taught, and they were really just, I think, I like to believe, that they were just expressing themselves with the means that they had available to them. Like they were making things that were utilitarian, and they needed them like for functionality, and they didn't have a lot of money. A lot of them were immigrants. So they were creating through what means they had available to them. But I totally grew up seeing that as like normal, and like this is what you do, you make with your hands, and you can make beautiful things. But again, that was like not the art side. That's the craft for fun side, or necessity side. But yes, I knew I was always going to be in the arts. I never thought about being anything else. Maybe, I just said maybe a gardener or a florist, but that was like, landscape architect. But then when I was in middle school and I learned that I had to do math to go to architecture school, like that was out. So I was going to be going to art school, and choosing a major in art school, I felt very intimidated by the hierarchy of art that I had set up for myself in my head. And I was not going to be a painter because I didn't identify as a painter. That seemed like if I claimed that, I was trying to be like the rock star of the art world, and I wasn't ready for that. So I liked drawing. I was always drawing, doing my little reproductions and stuff. And I felt really comfortable rendering things realistically. And I think when you're in high school, that's can be impressive. You know, like, oh, look at this very realistic hand I drew. And all your friends are like, oh, you know, that's so cool. So I thought, okay, I'll go for drawing. You can probably relate to this. So I went for drawing at the University of Central Florida, and it just so happened that that major was a drawing printmaking combination. And I had done some printmaking in high school, but I really didn't know. I was aware that I did not know all the techniques and all, you know, the history of everything and all the ways of making prints. And I'll show you. When I first went, I'm going to show you some this is college work, guys, okay? So when I first went in, this is like a couple years in, I was really still interested in rendering things realistically, but then I was starting to put them into kind of atmospheric, abstract environments. So here's a couple little pieces. But I did have a tangent when I started to get into printmaking where I did really detailed little etchings. And I bring this up not because it's like my finest work, but to show that this really helped me realize that I was interested in process-based ways of making. I really enjoyed, because this is my first time being exposed to like printmaking, right? Like cranking it through a big press. Like we're using techniques that are hundreds of years old where you're like prepping your copper plate and smoking it in the studio and drawing on it and putting it in the different chemical baths and prepping your paper, a certain paper, like a cotton rag paper, it has to be this big, and you dampen it, and you know, there's just so much technique involved. And the smell of the ink, like everything was just felt so right. And I cranked it through the press and I lift up the paper and I saw the image and I thought, oh my gosh, like I can do this for the rest of my life. I remember having the thought, like, this is an important moment, like whatever that means. I don't know. But there's something about pulling the print off and seeing a final product and having known I followed the steps felt really good. And I think what I was in love with wasn't the printmaking, but it was, again, like following the process to get to the end result and having a finished product that lives outside of you. So I was cruising through undergrad. Felt really not easy. I mean, it's work. You know, you're in the studio, you're up all night. But I felt very excited, and like I was exploring so many different mediums and learning so much. I felt very supported. The program there is not big, but it's really good, especially in drawing and printmaking. And I thought, well, now it's time for me to go to graduate school. It's going to be just as exciting and easy. I mean, easy. And I went to the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia for printmaking, which that program, many grad school programs for like an MFA are pretty loose. It depends on where you go, but you can go for one thing, but they encourage you to do whatever you want. So I moved to Philadelphia. I was really excited to be there because my now husband was living there, and we had been long distance. So I was really excited to just be in a city. I mean, I had never lived outside of Florida before. And I really loved being there and just seeing things that were hundreds of years old and everything in Florida is pretty new, So seeing these old buildings and going to like art walks and the real DIY art spirit that certain parts of Philadelphia have, I loved all of it. But in the studio, when it came to my work, for the first time in my life, which was very disorienting, was I started to feel blocked and really insecure. And I knew I was there to be making, but everything felt so hard. And not because I didn't have ideas. I mean, I had a lot of ideas, but nothing felt obvious or clear. Like there was no clear path forward. Whereas before, I was just trucking along. I had one idea and I would jump to the next and the next. And I felt constantly propelled to just keep making. And all of a sudden I was in this new environment. I was avoiding going into the studio. I would make just enough because I had to, because I'm in grad school, and like, this is my job. But it felt hard. And ironically, I started to get a little bit more crafty with things, and I would make myself award ribbons, because the irony is I was not winning at grad school. So a lot of my grad school work has this award ribbon motif. But I started to get kind of like irreverent with it and would make these broken apart things and whatever. But my professor saw that this was not the me that I wanted to be for grad school, right? Like they were trying to get me to shake things up a little bit, and they like honestly, they were really trying hard, God bless them. They sent me to Italy for a summer for like an art and culture seminar, and they were recommending me for all these apprenticeships and internships, and like just to get me out of my rut. So I got an apprenticeship at this place called the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, and it's been around since the 70s. It started as a place where, because I had been doing printmaking, like silkscreen and etching and woodcut, so I had a printmaking experience, and Fabric Workshop and Museum started off in the 70s as a place where well-known artists, like established in their careers, would come in, and they weren't fabric textile designers, but the Fabric Workshop would help them facilitate printed textiles, and then they would keep them in their archive. So anyway, now when I'm there, this is a while ago, guys. But the building that and the facilities they have now they have archives and great gallery space and huge studios, and they just will facilitate any project an artist, the artist they choose wants to do. And the artist that I worked with most was Tristan Lowe, and he did this life-size sperm whale. It's inflatable, and it has a felt overlay. And it was the first time that I really assisted a project, or really assisted any project, but was part of a project that was of this scale and had so many hands on it. I mean, there were teams figuring out how to do the inflatable, teams figuring out how to, because it's like a bounce house, so there's like a fan in there and the whole thing, and how do we create the skin for the whale. And I was like on Team Barnacle, and I would be sewing barnacles and like helping pin, and that's why I put on there, because but it was so good. I point this out, this particular period of time in this project, because it was really what I needed to get myself out of my head and have my hands be making, but kind of not be wrought with indecision and questioning my creative practice and what am I making and why. I could just do the work for them, and it was such a good motivator. Plus, I was around all these, really talented people making, and all the while, just being thankful that I'm starting to make a living making with my hands. Like, how could you be upset with that? This was really a good way for me to mix it up. At the same time, I needed a job. So I went to anthropology, and I said, I'll be a sales associate, like whatever. And I don't know if you've ever been to that store in Philadelphia, but it's beautiful. It's a 4-story, people are nodding, like it's beautiful. It's a 4-story mansion. It's a historic home. It was originally built as a home for one of the Drexels, and then late 1800s. A lot of the architectural details, original details, are still there. And the 4-story, so I got a job. And a couple days in, I realized that the 4th floor was a studio space, and there was a little team, a visual team, that was making everything in the store. So all the displays, and there was like a woodworking section and a painting section. And I was like, this is probably better suited to my skill set. Just so you know, like I have an art degree, and I'm working at Fabric Workshop making this huge whale, and I'm like, okay. but I was kind of trying to prove like I can work in teams, like I'm not going to try to steal the show and make my own art. Like I will make art for you, okay? So I got a job in anthropology, and I worked there for almost a decade on the visual team at this store and at Home Office and different stores in the Philly metro area, and did store openings. And I think I learned the most in those, but that's a long time, 10 years. But I did learn so much about actually using power tools and being resourceful and shopping at Home Depot and taking really uninspiring things and transforming it through manipulation into something bigger than itself and better than itself. And anyway, here's a couple of things that I did when I was there. That's like an original Tiffany stained glass window. It was just such an inspiring place to be, and to be working with people that were, I felt back on track. I felt motivated. I felt excited to be there. It was fast paced. I love seasonally changing things over. And at the time, any corporation changes a lot over decades, but at the time there was a lot of creative freedom in store to store. So I felt like, great. It was really motivating. So I moved to Florida, back to Florida with my husband. I was working in anthropology. I was freelancing projects because, you know, people around here, event spaces and little boutiques, they don't necessarily need a full-time visual person, but I would pop in and do projects for them. And I also had my first daughter, Violet, who's 7, so that's a lot. That's a lot to be juggling, and I realized that I couldn't be with her the way I wanted to and then be doing all these other things. So I left anthropology and I was focusing on my freelance work. But I still feel like now I'm in the vein of like I'm a display artist, right? Like this is what I do. This is what I've been doing for a decade. That's my title. I don't have a personal studio practice. And when she came around, looking back, I realized that I had some major postpartum anxiety. Major. But I didn't know. I just thought that's what being a new mom felt like. Crazy and overwhelmed and anxious and can't sleep at night and all the things. So I started to think about the work that I was doing and trying to be really intentional about what I was putting my effort into. And I could no longer just be doing everything and be before I realized I was saying yes to too much because I would just be thankful to be able to be making for a living. So I would say yes. But now I had to be really intentional about where I was sending my energy for my sanity. And because if I was saying yes to a project, I was going to be saying no to time with her. And so I started to only take on projects that I really felt like were going to work for me and fill me up in some way because I needed something to fill me up. I was feeling really depleted. And around this time, I'm so thankful. I always shout Danny Mitchell out from Gather and Seek because she had started Elizabeth Ave Station, which I'm sure you've all been there at some time. We're there at some time. And I had known her for a while, and she just said, like, hey, come in and just do whatever you want. Like, just for a season, like, just whatever you want. And it really got me in a good groove of thinking, like, looking inside and thinking, like, what am I in the mood for right now? Like, what is going to fill me up? What's going to give me something to, like, get me out of my head and think about myself as a human that's not just a mom. And, you know, so I was inventing little installations and a little mural, and every season that she'd have me go in, I would kind of try to outdo myself a little bit, like get a little bit more ambitious. But it started to feel comfortable. Like I started to feel like I had a groove, and I was starting to separate myself from the commercial work, like the display work. It was starting to feel more like a practice because I was looking inside a little bit more to see like what I needed to fill me up. So this was the first iteration of the shapes that I'm now doing. And it's a wood frame with holes drilled all the way around the perimeter, and I weave into it. And what I was feeling like with this is what I needed to see visually was something that was mesmerizing and gentle and colorful and soothing in some way. Like this is what I needed. I personally needed this time, so I was gonna like will it into fruition. I think that's part of the aspiration of Ethos. Like we'll tie it back a little bit. I'm willing these feelings into existence. I need it to happen so I can be part of that experience because it's what is going to help me mentally. So I knew I wanted something because I like process. I like following the steps and getting an end result. I wanted something that part of the process would be very repetitive and meditative so I could kind of get lost in it. And that has become a little bit of a safe space for me. So now over the years I've been making it, I get into the zone very quickly. And I think on some level, as creatives, we're all chasing that in the zone feeling. And this has helped me get there very quickly. Like it's easy for me to tap in now. And I've been doing it for years, so I've gotten better at it. But it was like hitting all the marks for me, this installation. I liked thinking them as like little portals or windows that the color field was kind of changing your perspective on the world beyond. And just on many levels, it was hitting the mark. So I had such a great response from this work that I just kept making it and was getting commission requests, and it's just happenstance really how it all worked out, and I'm so thankful. But it's been the first time that I really have claimed like a personal studio practice outside of commercial work or people. I'm making for me. I'm making because I'm choosing to make these things and not because it was initiated by a client or, you know. And so here's just a couple more installations. Why I've enjoyed working in this process for so long is because now that I'm in it, I can kind of feel like that excitement that I felt like as a kid or as an undergrad, where I'm just excited. I see a path forward. I have ideas of what I want to come next. And as I get there, new ideas come along and things evolve and the shapes can get more complicated and more colorful or not. And I feel like I'm speaking in like they're like it's a little vocabulary, like little soldiers, and how I rearrange them helps me express different things or different feelings. Or I do draw on nature a lot, and points of inspiration come from nature, and but also kind of standing in as metaphor for human emotion. It all gets mixed up, but it's coming out, and I can reconfigure these shapes to kind of suit what I feel like I'm going through at the time. And I will say that, like, for the anxiety part, and we've all had a very crazy past couple of years, and I felt this process and this practice and just like the actual physical moving of my body through making has been so therapeutic through it all. But the past year has been especially hard for me and my family. Almost a year ago, my grandfather passed away, and he was 95. I saw him almost every day, which I know I feel very fortunate to have had that with him. But he really was influential to me in like how I do seek beauty and order in a world that cannot feel like that. And I'll just jump back to like the postpartum anxiety stuff. Like, that was part of the intention of the work, and how I arrived to this is that I was really trying to focus on still small poetic moments in every day that could just get me through it. Like finding the beauty right now, and like trying to calm my anxiety through being present and observing beauty around you. But I think I got a lot of that from him. And then 3 weeks later, my youngest brother, Adam, passed away from a fentanyl poisoning. And then, it's been incredibly hard. And then a couple months after that, my grandmother passed away. So it's been a big year of loss, like a lot of loss and a lot of grief and a lot of feeling the feelings, but a lot of joy too. Life isn't all just grief. And I felt very creatively stimulated, more so than I ever have. And I think part of it is because I need to be making. Like, this is not just for fun, like what am I in the mood for? Like, it helps me get through it. It helps me process, and it helps me take intangible feelings and ideas and like work them into the frame, like through physical movement. And then I have my end, because, back to the process thing, like I'm following the steps, I make my piece, and now this piece sits outside of me. And I can look at it more objectively. So all the ideas and feelings and points of inspiration and memories are now represented in this abstract shape. But there's a healing quality to it for me. So really the process is much more important than the end result. Like, I'm going to be making no matter how it's received into the world, because I need to. And I think that's the difference between where I was in grad school and like making because I felt like I had to express myself, and now making because I feel like I need to express myself. Like, there's things that are going to come up, like they get to come up. And how lucky am I that I have found this way of working that can help me deal with all this. And I don't know if it's sculpture or art or where it sits on the hierarchy of like painters and where is this? But I'm at the point now where it's so beneficial for me that I don't really care. Like, I don't know if it's hard still to like claim that I'm a sculptor and illustrator, because I'm installation art. I'm not an illustrator, guys. I don't know where that came from. Installation artist, because I didn't go to school for that. I wasn't trained in that. I was trained as like a very 2D artist, but again, it doesn't really matter so much anymore. And I really am trying to hold these things in tension. Like, I like craft and I like art, and these are my sensibilities, and this is just what's coming out, and like I'm okay with whatever that looks like. And I don't know if I'm going to be making this particular work forever, but I at least now know enough to trust myself, and that I can look in and see, like, draw on what needs to come out next. And if it looks different, then that's fine. But it's really the making that's important. And then the end result, it just happens to be what it is. So anyway, that's how we get to what I'm doing right now. But thanks for listening.